Welcome to the first in a series of COVID-19 recovery modules. This multi-module series will expand our existing COVID-19 toolkit available on the websites maintained by the Leading Ed Partnerships and the Illinois State University Center for the Study of Education Policy. This content is being recorded so that our lead project enrolled principals and principal coaches may access it on demand at a time convenient to them. The content has been open sourced so that school leaders everywhere may benefit from access. Let's look at our learning objectives for today. Participants will receive guidance, resources, and strategies for recognizing and messaging ESSER funding as an opportunity for schools to envision and re-envision education, ensuring ESSER funding balances targeted short-term strategies with capacity building strategies focused on long-term impact, explore high leverage practices to motivate strategy innovation and resource allocation aimed at accelerating learning, review shared decision-making protocols to engage stakeholders in shaping the school's priorities for short and long-term gain, and establish comprehensive communication strategies that promote a clear understanding of the school's goals when it comes to ESSER funding and COVID-19 recovery planning. Let's meet our facilitators. Dara Carr is currently the Director of Professional Development for ROE 28, representing Bureau, Henry, and Stark counties. She is a former middle and high school English teacher who is a well-known statewide expert in continuous school improvement planning. Dara is currently a member of the Illinois Priority Learning Standards cohort to develop statewide capacity builders in this area. Dr. Alicia is the Executive Co-Director of the LEAD Projects, a role she shares with Dr. Erica Hunt. In her role, Alicia oversees a massive multi-year formal research study funded by the U.S. Department of Education involving approximately 140 schools and more than 50 districts across the state of Illinois, located in ROE Regions 1, 17, 19, and 28, as well as a cohort of school affiliates of the Greeley Center for Catholic Education at Loyola University. Alicia has extensive experience in principal preparation and development and leadership coaching, and is a well-known thought expert in these areas in the state of Illinois and nationally. Dr. Allison Slade has served as a teacher, professional developer, consultant, and educational leader in the city of Chicago and in the surrounding suburbs. After founding Namaste Charter School, she served as a principal for more than 14 years and works as a consultant for the Chicago Public Education Fund as a principal coach for the school leaders serving as professional learning community leaders across the city. Linda Shea is the professional learning designer for the Leading Ed Partnerships team at Illinois State University Center for the Study of Education Policy. The American Recovery Plan and the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund provides abundant, once-in-a-lifetime resources for districts and schools to invest in COVID-19 recovery. This module will help you to plan for the highest and best use of American Recovery Plan and elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds. The COVID-19 worldwide health event is a crisis that will require a multi-year, multifaceted response. A centering question for us as we enter into this content is, how will we balance the immediate urgency around intended and desired student social and academic outcomes with the need to attend to adult learning and the selection and implementation of high-impact instructional practices that will produce long-term benefit? In this next session, Dr. Alicia Haller will provide some issue framing for us. We understand that the goal has to be to build back better rather than return to normal. To actually reimagine the experience of school for children will require intentionality and discipline to keep from defaulting back to the status quo. Under the ARP plan, the focus is on equity, diverse educator pipelines, development for teachers and leaders, Integrated service delivery models, such as increasing the number of counselors, school psychologists, school-based health services professionals by 3 times the current number, and literacy attainment, that is reading proficiency for every child by grade 3, and the principles of cycles of inquiry for finding and solving instructional problems that limit student engagement and learning can be applied throughout this module. Alicia, we welcome you.
In the last year, Congress has appropriated roughly $200 billion to support K-12 education, funding that we believe gives educators a fighting chance to offset the pandemic's crushing impact on our nation's school. But in order to fully recover and come out of this better than we went into the pandemic, we've got to have a laser-like focus on high leverage strategies that demonstrate impact and build capacity in our schools that will reap long-term benefits. There's no doubt that the influx of stimulus funds presented an exciting opportunity, but it isn't one without risks. In fact, the stakes couldn't be higher for our schools and for our students. If educators squander more than $200 billion in funding that's been appropriated, they could lose hard-won traction involving efforts to establish equitable school finance systems that support our most vulnerable students. And those setbacks could last for decades. Or worse, if we can't point to exactly what came out of this massive investment, we could be contributing to the downfall of public education as we know it. And that's not hyperbole, because this truly is an unprecedented federal infusion of funds. So what can leaders do? For those of you participating in the LEAD project, you know that the first step in the cycles of inquiry approach is to fully understand the problem you want to address. How will you know what your most pressing challenges are? Explore the data. And by that, we don't just mean student outcome data, although formative assessments that shed light on current levels of student performance are necessary to identify those that have been most impacted by the disruption. Additionally, you'd need to seek input from all of your stakeholders, teachers, families, students, community partners, etc. And you would also want to explore how the behaviors of adults in the building have contributed to your outcomes, both positively and negatively. By answering 2 fundamental questions, what are students struggling with and which students are struggling, you'll be able to narrow a long list of needs and wants to your highest priority areas. The time you take to seek input and collectively analyze data will allow you to build buy-in from the school community, while at the same time providing quantitative data to explain how decisions about funding priorities were made. Through this series, we will provide you with tools and resources that you can use to collaborate with your teachers and staff to develop responsive strategies that will put your school on the path to COVID recovery. This is a rare opportunity with staggering sums of money to bring about real and lasting change, if you take the time now to develop plans that will maximize resources for short and long-term gains. The goal is to build back better rather than trying to return to normal. The solutions we develop will form the foundation for our collective work to reimagine the experience of school for children. So now we find ourselves once again at the end of another school year. Regardless of the pandemic, time marches on. For many, this year was a long and stressful year. Right now, you and your staff may be feeling stretched or anxious that the pandemic will likely drag on to next year, despite all the talks of communities opening up and seeking a return to normalcy. You may also feel as though there is still so much work to do to prepare for summer programming and fall reopening. Like last year at this time, we suspect you're under pressure from multiple sources to make decisions and develop plans about a somewhat murky future. Those are all legitimate concerns, and you're right to want to attend to them. Trust me when I say you're not alone in feeling a sense of urgency. We work with education leaders at all levels, and the stress they are feeling is palpable. In fact, I think many would like to hit the proverbial fast forward button and not stop until we are on the other side of this pandemic. Fortunately, not all decisions need to be made right now. And I'm sure you know that the crush of year-end activities and the disruption you've experienced this year isn't yours alone. The year has likely taken a toll on your teachers as well. Many of the participants in our project have identified that their teachers are simply exhausted and need a break. But we also know that as a leader, you possess strong persistent skills. And because of that, you may be trying to just soldier on in order to get things done. We both know that while your intentions are admirable, you likely won't be able to put your best efforts into it without a break. Equally problematic would be if you were to try to complete future forward planning in isolation. Your attempts to reduce your teacher stress by doing work yourself may be greatly diminished if they return to school with plans that aren't reflective of what they actually need. And honestly, none of us can keep up with a breakneck pace forever without completely burning out. For that reason, we would encourage you to do two things. First, practice self-care by taking some time off. That might be a regularly scheduled vacation, or maybe just a long weekend where you don't check your phone or your email and completely disconnect from the school. At the very least, you'll want to adjust your schedule to ensure you're getting outside for an hour or so each day and that you're regularly spending undistracted time with your family. Research indicates that taking a restful break will actually allow you to be more productive when you come back at it. Second, triage your to-do list. In other words, determine which decisions and tasks must be done immediately and which can or should wait. Summer is a natural time to take a deep breath, relax, and reflect. While you will likely be attending to summer programming and the hiring process to fill vacancies, we'd also urge you to resist rushing into making decisions about recovery funds until you've sought input from stakeholders and identified high leverage strategies. You will also want to avoid asking too much of the teachers you rely on most. They've had a long year too, so use their time and energy wisely. For example, they can't be overseeing your summer program and be helping to identify learning gaps and developing plans for the fall. So think about how you might use some of the new funding to engage a broader number of staff members over the summer to complete vital planning. And lastly, we suggest that you resist the urge to return to a business as usual type of mentality. Nothing about this summer or fall is business as usual. As you begin to think about plans for the use of ESSER III funding to address unfinished learning, it'll be helpful if you approach the planning with a growth mindset. In other words, view the recovery period as an opportunity to promote innovation and experimentation rather than a period to address deficiencies. Want to motivate your school community? Don't message the work as focusing on learning loss. Frame it as an opportunity to accelerate learning and growth. Senator John F. Kennedy once said, "When written in Chinese, the word crisis is composed of two characters, one that represents danger and one that represents opportunity." In this case, the danger is in returning to school in the fall as if it were any other fall. Again, don't seek to return to normal, but engage your school community in conversations about what it might look like or feel like if we did this schooling thing really, really well. We recognize that as a school principal, your sphere of control is somewhat limited as many decisions are being made at the state or district level. However, we all know that the devil is in the details. There's often a great deal of discretion involved in determining how you choose to operationalize the state or district directives at the school level. The extent to which you maximize and leverage the autonomy you're given will determine the extent to which you're able to capitalize on this opportunity to bring about meaningful change. Principals are change agents in schools with the power to transform teaching and learning. Now's the time to think creatively and explore the possibilities. Einstein said that in every crisis there is an opportunity, and he's right. You'll find that in the years that follow, the schools that come out of this pandemic ahead won't be the ones who focus on remediation of deficiencies. No, the ones that come out of this on top will be the ones who approach things differently and innovate their way out of the crisis. This pandemic can be a powerful catalyst for change. As the principal, you must be the one to take the lead for that change. I'm not going to lie, it won't be easy because it'll take the collective talents and energy of the entire school community to pull off this kind of change. Leading doesn't mean you have to do everything yourself. Instead, it'll be your job to create the conditions for teachers to engage students in meaningful learning experiences that spur and accelerate growth. Fortunately, there's a lot of money coming your way, and that's always helpful, right? Well, maybe. Think I'm exaggerating? Well, let's look at how many lottery winners end up with happily ever after stories. Turns out, not many. More than 70% of lottery winners end up filing for bankruptcy within the first 5 years of receiving their money. As a piece written by Bellwether Education put it, there's a reason why most cultures and faith traditions have cautionary tales about how abundance can rebound in unexpected ways. In other words, we may just look back at this windfall as a curse rather than a blessing. You may be thinking, hold on a minute, what about the 30% of winners that didn't file bankruptcy? Well, of those winners, 40% still reported being less happy after they won. Why? Because they felt like everyone wanted something from them. Friends, family, even strangers. And even with all of their winnings, they couldn't make everyone happy. This is analogous to the multitude of vendors and special interest groups that are vying for attention as millions of dollars flow largely unchecked into school districts. The potential and scale is incredible, but you still will not be able to do everything for everyone. That's why plans developed by districts and schools should focus on a smaller number of high leverage practices that will demonstrate the greatest impact. Balancing strategies between short-term and long-term benefits is important as well. Otherwise, our schools could end up squandering this opportunity, just like the vast majority of lottery winners. All of that said, it really isn't all bad. We have some important lessons learned from the pandemic. Just think about it. Remote learning has spawned a culture of experimentation and risk-taking with technology and with instruction. Synchronous learning, asynchronous learning, hybrid, high flex, simultaneous hybrid, learning management system, web conferencing tools. The list just goes on and on. Now that technology has become an educational lifeline, teachers have developed deep expertise in some of these modalities and tools. They've moved from knowing how to teach in class with technology to teaching virtually via technology, and have shifted from using technology to supplement or complement instruction to using technology as a driver of instruction and differentiation. In some cases, the use of technology has allowed for greater and greater levels of differentiation. The disruption caused by the pandemic has forced schools to be more focused on instructional quality and instructional design. In many cases, it has allowed for greater differentiation, meeting each student at the level they need. It is forcing U.S. districts and communities to tackle digital and other equity issues. Schools have become more focused on the whole learner, increasing the focus on social emotional learning and responsive strategies. And we've seen that some students have excelled through self-paced learning. The amount of collaborative problem solving required to navigate all of the seemingly unending and unpredictable challenges has been nothing short of astounding. So take a minute to reflect on all you've been through and congratulate yourself for persevering and continuing to learn through it all. And keep in mind, wherever you are right now, your present circumstances do not determine where you can go. They merely determine where you start. For those of you who have viewed our previous COVID-19 response series, you may remember that we introduced a simple strategy for decision making. If you feel like you're being asked to make a lot of decisions in a short period of time, one simple strategy might be to classify your decisions as reversible or irreversible. Reversible decisions are those with low stakes that generally have a low impact on staff, students, or families. They are the kind of thing that can be easily revised or reversed. Irreversible decisions are those with high stakes that have a significant impact on staff, students, or families, and they usually can't easily be changed or reversed. The purpose of classifying decisions as reversible or irreversible is because you can triage what to decide now and what to determine later. In other words, reversible decisions can be made as soon as possible, but irreversible decisions should require that they be made as late as possible, allowing you more time to gather or receive additional information or data. With this strategy, leaders will want to accelerate reversible decisions and decelerate irreversible decisions as much as possible. Classifying the vast number of issues that require you to make decisions may help address your sense of urgency by allowing you to communicate about what the reversible decisions are now. That way you can hold off on some of the more weighty issues.
As we look towards planning for the largest influx of funds into public education in decades, we need to keep equity at the forefront. In traditional planning processes, we often design for how the 80% of perceived average students will be served. We then address the remaining 20%, the outliers. While it's an approach chosen for efficiency, it actually results in time spent retrofitting and or parallel processes to accommodate those who don't fit the average mold. As this cartoon suggests, this creates unnecessary, redundant effort, assigns stigma, and results in suboptimal outcomes for all. Erin Larkin McGuire, Senior Dean at Relay Graduate School of Education, says, "This is a chance to break old habits and upgrade how we make decisions and build systems to ensure a stronger and more equitable foundation for all kids." ESSER funds are allocated to states using the Title I formula, indicating equity and access to funds being a critical factor in distribution. Now that it's critical that equity is used as a through line in constructing our fund use plans. If we fail to plan with the most vulnerable students not just in mind, but at the table, we'll be stuck with old ways of learning that are both impractical and unsuited to moving us forward. This table looks at the 3 appropriations of ESSER funds. While ESSER 1, the CARES Act funding, was only about $250 per pupil, ESSER 2 was about $1,100 per pupil. ESSER 3 is $2,400 per pupil. So you can see there is a substantial investment using these funds. Per the Department of Education, districts must involve meaningful consultation with a variety of stakeholders. These include students, families, school administrators, district administrators, special education administrators, teachers, principals, other educators, school staff, employees, and unions. And if relevant, many other constituencies, including but not limited to tribes, civil rights organizations, and other stakeholders representing students. In the additional resources section, you will find an American Recovery Plan Elementary and Secondary Education Emergency Relief Fund fact sheet for the use of these large ESSER III funds. This resource details each fund used and reservations. It is critical as we are looking to create ESSER III plans that we are creating a multi-year spending plan that will be used to focus on students and relief. These funds can be accessed through the entire summer of 2024. And as a reminder, that would be 3 additional summers for program use. If you're interested in looking at the significant amount of funds that were allocated to your district, you can use the ESSER III funding database linked here. It details out each district's base allocation. In addition to the equity principle discussed earlier, being transparent and ensuring broad participation in spending decisions will be critical since this funding allocation is public. Typically, in federal allocations, the supplement, not supplant rule applies as a regulatory requirement. Supplemental generally means in addition to. In this image, the cupcake itself represents the core. The frosting, sprinkles, and the cherry can be thought of as supplemental to the cupcake. These are in addition to the main cupcake. Let's consider another example. It is generally considered the district's responsibility to staff every classroom with a highly qualified teacher. But federal Title I funds have been used in the past to staff teachers in specialty areas such as reading recovery. A reading recovery teacher would be considered an additional or supplemental resource for those who need it, much like the cherry. ESSER III funds are not constrained by the supplement, not supplant regulation. This means that if your core funding has been reduced because of enrollment loss during the pandemic period, you would be able to staff appropriately in anticipation of students returning to in-person learning using these ESSER funds. This regulatory relief will provide for greater flexibility over the use of ESSER funds. As with all public fund use, if questions arise, consult with your local budget analysts and experts in this area. This quote by Maya Angelou sums up where we are today. Do the best you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, do better. The pandemic has taught us that our previous education system really did not meet the needs of most of our students. However, we have learned a substantial amount over the last 18 months during the pandemic. The reopening will require justification for what we keep and what we abandon. Recall that during the shutdown, districts and schools were able to defer CDC guidelines or to the Illinois State Board of Education for political cover as they were making substantial decisions around the opening of schools. Although some ongoing safety regulations may come from the outside of the districts, the COVID decisions that we make from this point forward are our own. It will be important to ask many questions, including, what have we learned about our students and their families this year? How might that shape the way we connect with families? What has worked well this year, and how could you amplify those things as you transition out of emergency education mode? What are you not looking forward to about going back to regular school? What needs to be stopped in order to make space for what you want to amplify? In the COVID Recovery Toolkit, we have created a protocol for use with your building leadership teams that can also be modified for use by teachers with various teacher teams as we plan for re-entry into the pandemic recovery period. In the protocol, we take time to have principals walk through an exercise that helps surface pre-pandemic successes in a school or grade level, things we learned through our pandemic experience that were areas of growth, often highlighted and exacerbated by the need to work and learn at home that further marginalized our historically underserved populations. We then walk through the ways to use these successes and areas of growth to create a new normal, rather than clinging on to the normal of the past that was clearly not working for many students. We encourage all leaders to review and execute a version of this protocol and reflection as a way to represent additional input from all needed stakeholder groups in the school. This slide looks at many potential recommended interventions and things that we have seen schools and districts used, which you might want to reconsider or proceed with caution. It is still very early, but in our tracking of districts thus far, we have seen lots of budget gap fills, thank you payments to teachers, facility and tech project use, curriculum updates. We urge proceeding in these domains with caution, as they often are narrow in focus and add recurring costs that are difficult to roll back if needed. The key fiscal rules should still be at the forefront, specifically avoiding the use of these funds for one-time dollars, spending on people that eat and breathe. Additional considerations should also be utilized when you are thinking about how to spend down funds, such as, is it possible to defer some of those ideas for a soon-to-come funding source, like the potential infrastructure bill? Ensure you are gathering as much unbiased information as possible as you create your spending plan. Seek targeted investments to increase learning time for students who need it the most. These are represented in the recommended investments in these 4 areas: professional development, technology, safety and facility, and resources. Also, it is critical that you be aware of the fact that these are one-time use funds and they will stop at some point. The Education Department has urged states and districts to be careful to minimize this funding cliff when the stimulus aid ends by using the money for purposes that do not result in unsustainable continuing commitments. Conversations about how to best invest public funds should be routine deliberations. If you have been doing this on a regular basis, it will not be difficult to convene stakeholders to solicit their input. If you have not been doing this on a regular basis, plan carefully for the process you will use. Do be clear, these funds are temporary and have a firm end date. These federal funds enable districts to maintain their current cost structure, but can and will eventually run out. The funding cliff occurs when this federal aid stops. Will this be sustainable when the funding is no longer available? This is a question you must ask to avoid falling over the funding cliff. You also want to consider other newly adopted rules and regulations related to student online personal protection, otherwise known as SOPA, which will come into effect as of July 1st, 2021. When you are looking at EdTech tools, make sure to consult this new regulation, which looks at online personal protection of students. These amendments require school districts to provide protection for student data when collected by educational technology companies and require that this data be used for beneficial purposes only. Prior to amendments, SOPA only regulated operators of websites, services, or applications that were used and marketed for K-12 educational purposes. However, now, in addition to regulating these technology providers, SOPA imposes requirements on school districts as well as the Illinois State Board of Education. Do make sure that you review your liability under these new legal requirements prior to your investments. Now that we've discussed some perils to avoid, I am going to hand it off to Dara Carr, who's going to discuss how to maximize ESSER funding by adopting research-informed strategies.
Teach Plus recently published findings from focus groups they conducted. These groups involved 532 teachers from 25 states. During these focus groups, they found that the pandemic had reinforced the societal value of in-person learning. They also found that there had been many promising innovations in response to the need for distant learning options. They found long-standing inequities in education have been exposed to a sobering degree for all of us. Teacher collaboration has become and will continue to be even more essential as teachers have transitioned into unfamiliar virtual learning spaces. Teachers want and are prepared to influence school and district level instructional decision making. In addition to these 5 takeaways, a survey conducted by the Annenberg Institute at Brown University of approximately 8,000 teachers learned that teachers who reported higher levels of self-efficacy were those whose principals supported the continuation of teacher team meetings in which teachers focused on improving instruction in the new environment. Additional recommendations can be found in the document 6 Pandemic Recovery Recommendations for School Leaders that will be posted to the resources available with this toolkit's Module 1. We also encourage you to look at ISBE's Life After the Pandemic resources. ISBE's guidance to return to in-person learning is to return to in-person learning as safely and as quickly as possible. To support COVID recovery, Illinois State Board of Education has identified 4 high leverage practices that they will actively support. These practices include high impact tutoring, interim assessment, bridge and transition supports, SEL community partnerships. In regard to high impact tutoring, ISBE plans to develop a high impact tutoring data bank to track tutor information, availability, assignments, and feedback. Schools will have the ability to access this information. Tutors will be provided with training. ESSER funds may be used to stipend tutors. Interim assessment. ISBE will encourage the utilization of assessment and assessment data to accurately identify learning gains, achievement gaps, and COVID-19's impact on learning in general. This information will inform the learning recovery period. The third recommendation is bridge programs. ISBE will look to possibly provide grant funds to districts to engage with the Illinois higher education community in developing transition plans that support 9th grade students entering into high school and high school students transitioning to community college, higher education, and vocational trade programs. Lastly, mental health professional development. ISBE will look to provide grants for partnerships between schools and community agencies to develop wraparound services and communities in schools models. Programs must bring services directly to students and families. ISBE will support mental health hubs across 6 Illinois regions to support students and educators impacted by this pandemic. The Student Care Department will continue to address student-related issues and concerns stemming from this pandemic. Later in this presentation, you will learn more about effective practices to fund when we summarize a review of recent research literature. I will turn it now over to Alicia Haller as she will continue to identify research-based initiatives.
Thank you, Dara. As Allison pointed out earlier, in the last year, Congress has appropriated roughly $200 billion in new supports for K through 12 education. Lessons learned from the prescriptive nature of national initiatives like Race to the Top have informed the more flexible nature of ESSER funding. However, with flexibility comes variation, and variation in how funds are spent results in wide variation in terms of results. For example, rather than focus intensely on a few high priority areas, leaders may spread funds around and spread them too thin in order to attempt to address a larger number of needs. In that case, despite its scale, the new funding could end up being spread so thin that it ultimately has little or no impact on student learning. In other words, $100 spent to address a single problem can often be much more effective than $1 spent 100 times. So districts and school leaders would be wise to think about economies of scale and determine how to maximize resources for greater gains in a small number of highly effective strategies. Time spent now figuring out how to organize stakeholders, maximizing various incentives the state may offer, and leveraging this incredible windfall most effectively will increase the impact it can have on your schools. And because your plan must be bottom up to get school buy-in, these dollars might actually bring about some systemic changes past reforms have failed to achieve. We realize that district and school leaders are in the process of developing plans for ESSER 3 and are likely feeling immense pressure to maximize return on investment in order to meet the soaring needs of their students. You're acutely aware that a year of instructional disruptions will likely take multiple years to recover from. For that reason, strategic resource use will require balancing the urgency of the moment while building towards an improved schooling experience for the long run. So now we're going to turn our attention to research-based, high-impact strategies that you will want to consider for use of your local ESSER funds. We've poured over the mountain of research and have compiled the list reflected on the left hand of this slide. The left column includes high-impact practices found in multiple research studies or from meta-analysis on specific strategies. The box on the right are strategies that often have strong supporters, but more often than not have failed to actually move the needle on learning. The first is targeted supports for families. That includes providing necessary resources like books, tools, that sort of thing, and directions for parents to support learning at home. Those strategies demonstrated increases in both math and reading scores. Families are much more likely to have the capacity to support reading skill development, so this is a great strategy for early learners. A second strategy that works, ensuring all students are exposed to grade level content. Compressed content, grade or enhanced RTI, MTSS interventions have shown little evidence that they accelerate student learning for students that are struggling. And some of those practices have actually demonstrated that they have an adverse long-term consequence. Additionally, research involving over 2 million students found that children who are provided with appropriate grade level instruction struggle far less and learned more than those who started at the same performance level, but instead spent significant time on below grade level content. This is especially true for students of color and those from low-income families. Yet they are more likely than their white, wealthy peers to experience remediation rather than grade level content. A third strategy that has demonstrated that it works, regularly scheduled teacher collaboration. This is not only essential in terms of identifying and addressing learning gaps that occurred since March of last year, it's also an important strategy for addressing adult SEL for your teachers. They want to be effective and get back to doing what they were trained to do, which is teach. In order to do that, they need and want to collaborate with their peers. You heard Dara included you heard that Dara included teacher collaboration as a key takeaway from research conducted by Teach Plus, and studies completed by the Annenberg Institute also support those findings. You may be hearing an awful lot about the next high leverage strategy, and that's high dosage tutoring. This includes one-on-one or small group tutoring on content that is on grade level and aligned to the content being offered in the classroom. Extended learning time is another strategy that has demonstrated impact. By that, we mean extended day, extended year, summer academic acceleration programs, etc., particularly those aimed at students who have been most impacted by the pandemic. In other words, students with the greatest unfinished learning are likely to show the greatest growth with that strategy. Systems for identifying students that have been most impacted by the pandemic is also crucial. While the U.S. Department of Education eliminated the supplement, not supplant requirement in ESSER, but that doesn't mean schools should be operating in a business as usual manner. As the cycles of inquiry process indicates, you need to know both what content or skills students are struggling with and which students are struggling. If care isn't given to how schools target specific interventions to students most in need, you could actually be exacerbating educational inequalities or stigmatizing students that should most benefit from the programs. In the resources that accompanied this module, you'll find research briefs from the Annenberg Institute at Brown University. The research briefs are clear and concise. They're targeted to district and school leaders involved in decision-making in recovery efforts. They clearly outline the invariable aspects of the strategy that must be attended to in order for the strategy to be highly likely to dramatically accelerate learning. For example, in order to achieve improved results with high dosage tutoring, tutors must be trained and use a curriculum aligned to what's being taught in the classroom. Tutoring should occur in person during the academic day, be targeted toward the lowest performing students, occur at least 3 times a week for 30 to 60 minutes each over at least 10 weeks, and have a ratio of no more than 1 tutor for every 3 students. If you cannot commit to that intensive model, you're not likely to achieve the positive results from tutoring that previous studies have shown. The same is true for other popular approaches. Let's take class size reduction, for example. While research suggests the need to get down to roughly 15 to 18 students per class to have a demonstrated impact on student learning, the strategy still continues to be highly popular. The strategy, while effective, has the added challenge of not likely being sustainable without core resources being allocated. So we would caution you to greatly consider 2 main factors when deciding on which strategies to adopt. The first being, can we implement the strategy with fidelity in order to achieve a similar level of results found in studies? And second, do we want to implement strategies that we will not be able to sustain after the funding runs out? We strongly believe that no strategy should be selected if you can't ensure that it will be implemented with fidelity, meaning you're attending to the non-negotiable aspects of the model. However, in some situations, there is reason to invest in strategies that are not sustainable beyond the ESSER funding period. For example, investments in professional development for teachers to learn new methods or new technologies. That type of strategy may have long-term gains, but not need to be continued after funding ends. If you choose a strategy that is not sustainable, like for instance, class size reduction, then you will want to clearly and repeatedly communicate the temporary nature of the intervention, lest your teachers and parents revolt when you can no longer afford to maintain the low class size. Lastly, you'll want to clearly define the cost and expected impact of any strategy you select. That will support your understanding and communication regarding the return on investment. For example, the expected gains for a large scale grade retention or class size reduction are relatively small for the massive investment being made. Further, accelerated math interventions are more likely to demonstrate higher growth in shorter periods of time than reading interventions. But reading interventions are more likely to be supported in the home if families are provided with specific materials and supports. So think about the interaction between your strategies. We realize that this year has been a challenge for many schools, with shifting learning models from remote to hybrid or in-person learning based on COVID exposure or restrictions. In fact, many district and school leaders have been consumed with the immediate needs of their staff and students. They've had little time to plan for summer learning, much less have clarity around which students need the most support, or what additional strings would be attached to any additional funding. So it's no surprise that in April, when the Center for Reinventing Public Education completed a review of summer programs from 100 medium and large-size school districts across the country, they found that nearly all of the district's summer program plans offered business as usual type programming that were not specifically targeted to accelerate learning for students most in need. In fact, the center found that of the 100 plans reviewed, only one district indicated they would use assessment to target students for summer learning. 23 identified enrichment as a top or only priority. Most of these included partnerships with community organizations in their summer offerings. Only 21 districts offered reading or math programs, but those were not targeted to students most in need. 79 districts offered less than 5 weeks of summer programming, which is considered a low dosage. And only 18 offered credit recovery programs, which was actually fewer than in previous years. But it wasn't all bad. There were some plans that might be worth exploring. For example, the St. Louis Public Schools included summer learning plan that incorporates a tiered approach to address learning recovery, as well as a post-secondary support and project-based learning options. The School District of Philadelphia hosted information sessions for families to learn about their summer options. They provided clarity about the risk and long-term impact of summer slide and the value of engaging children in academic programming during those months. Their communication strategy is definitely worth exploring. San Antonio Independent School District put out information about virtual summer program with both synchronous and asynchronous instruction, and they offered it to all K-8 students. Columbus City Schools included multiple partners, some unusual partners like the Historical Society and a local conservatory. And the San Francisco United School District established a coalition of community partners, including local business leaders, in order to offer a host of free summer programs for students and families. Unfortunately, those highlights were the exception. What the center found missing in all of these plans were research-based, high-leverage learning strategies that target recovery efforts on those with the greatest need. What is needed is use of assessments to address personal learning needs. With most states foregoing standardized tests this year and many districts canceling their interim or summative assessments, it's not surprising that identifying and prioritizing students most impacted by COVID were not included in any of the plans explored. High dosage tutoring is also missing. Despite the large and growing research base and broad support for high dosage tutoring, this strategy was almost completely absent from the 100 plans that were reviewed. Only one district outlined a plan for high dosage tutoring. That was Idaho's West Ada School District. Research-based approaches to accelerated learning were not articulated in any plan, and there was little evidence in terms of public transparency about how federal stimulus funds would be used for summer learning. Now, it's certainly understandable that many districts and schools were consumed by just getting through an incredibly challenging and unprecedented school year. That left most with little or no capacity to redesign an entire summer program. So these data points are not intended to be critical. However, with the additional ESSER funding and the extended frame for its use, next summer has to be focused on targeting programming around high leverage strategies for students most in need. Next, Linda's going to go into a little more detail about what the research tells us about how summer programming can support your recovery efforts.
Thank you, Alicia. In this next segment, we're going to be talking a little bit about summer learning opportunities and provide you some guidance on why it is that we ought to be creative in meeting the needs of both students and teachers. We know that students, teachers, and principals alike have had a year like no other, and this is a great time to make some changes in order to accommodate both our kids and our teachers as they are very fatigued. We've actually become aware of some instances in which districts are doubling the summer stipend just to recruit staff. If teachers are living in households eligible for ESSER funds, they may be less motivated to apply to teach summer school to supplement their income. For these reasons, it may be time to think creatively about how to approach summer programming. Think about creative scheduling, such as reduced periods for teachers. Must they teach the entire summer program? Must they teach every day that the program is offered? Think about creative calendaring. Summer school often begins immediately after the school year ends. Why not take a 2-week break between the end of the year and the beginning of summer school? For this summer in particular, ask who are the teachers that you want to engage in extended time for learning planning, and who are the teachers that you want to engage in summer program delivery. You know who your go-to staff members are. They, like you, may be overextended and are too polite to say no. We cannot afford to burn these people out. Remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint. ESSER 3 funds are available for use through 2024, which means, as Allison stated earlier, as many as 4 summer programs in our future that could be funded through ESSER. Recall the Annenberg survey mentioned previously by Dara, in which it was reported that teachers feel less stressed and more confident in their abilities when they have continuous opportunities to collaborate with their peers. Maintaining structures and routines will actually reduce their stress, not exacerbate it. If you find opportunities to bring teachers together for summer planning, they'll have a clear path going forward into the fall, and all of their long-range planning will have been done in cooperation with colleagues. Provide a breather while finding ways to keep teachers engaged. Everyone will need something different. Be a responsive leader. In at least one district, one principal decided not to offer summer school this year after a review of data that suggested limited gain for those who were enrolled when compared with those who were not enrolled. Be forthright with teachers and say, we can provide the same level of programming we did last year and get the same results, or we can regroup and plan for something new and different and improved next year. There's no universal right or wrong answer, but there is a, given our local conditions, what's right for us at this point in time answer. Is it worth doubling the summer stipend to recruit teachers if kids are actually no better off than they would be if they had not intended? We challenge you to make this a summer of learning. For both yourself, your teachers, and your students. And we'd like for you to think about how it is that you will allocate time to make that possible. First, slow down. Resist the temptation to make quick, irreversible decisions. Second, review guidance documents and resources. Identify, collect, and analyze data and information to optimize your decision making. And finally, develop a plan to engage teachers in reflective discussions and planning for the fall. We understand that students may experience gaps in content knowledge, exhibit underdeveloped social skills due to reduced opportunities for social interaction, and suffer from trauma that may impact student and adult well-being. We're exhausted from a year that has required agility, major pivots, and lots of loss, not just of learning, but of family and community life as we've come to know it. There's real pressure to recoup or recover an entire year of learning. In fact, many state legislatures are incentivizing districts to offer ambitious summer school programs. But this rush to stand and deliver is flawed thinking for a number of reasons. First, this assumes that the COVID-19 burden has been distributed equally across all students, all families, all households, and all communities. We know this is not the case. Second, this places unrealistic pressure on teachers to immediately catch everyone up. Has there ever been a time when all students reach the same level of proficiency at the same point in time? Third, a robust summer school program is unlikely to really improve outcomes unless we do something dramatically different from what most people did over the course of the last school year. If we really want to improve outcomes for students and help them deepen expertise, improve motivation, increase fluency with foundational skills, and apply new understandings to solve meaningful problems, we have to adopt strategies that are known to impact learning. When you're ready to contemplate a redesign of your summer learning programs, consider the following. Design in ways that meet the needs of the whole child. Students may be deconditioned, and they may need more frequent reminders about how we do school. They may also have experienced trauma. So how can we ensure that students are socially connected with adults and peers, and that their social, emotional, and academic needs are fully addressed? What opportunities might there be to employ school counselors, school psychologists, school social workers, school nurses, and other allied health staff to complement the teaching staff? Could these special area experts resource teachers with strategies and activities to better support all learners? Use performance-based assessments to better understand what students can do. Students may have received failing grades for non-attendance or missed assignments, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't know something. Consider the barriers that exist and how students can show what they know in a variety of ways. What creative response opportunities do students have to demonstrate or represent their learning? How might we rethink instructional design, assessment, and reporting based on what students can do and the application of what they know? Develop learner agency. When learners have the power to act, they're motivated and invested in the work that they take on. How might we create opportunities where students have choice and influence, power and decision-making authority to take meaningful action that results in positive community and social benefit? Engage students in relevant and authentic learning experiences. When students have opportunities to explore, discuss, meaningfully co-construct understanding, and engage in real-world problem solving and projects that are relevant to the learner, they're more motivated to persist. How might students investigate and learn to solve problems that matter to them and their peers? I might share an example of how developing learner agency and engaging students in relevant and authentic learning experiences actually occurred in one Illinois school by sharing this illustration. In 1974, a third grade class at Dennis Lab School in Decatur, Illinois, made history by successfully petitioning then Governor Walker to adopt the brown and orange monarch butterfly as the state insect. 40 years later, another third grade class, the class of 2014, pursued city landmark status for a sculpture that had been commissioned to commemorate the original event. Students worked with the local school board, the city council, and the local historical society. They learned poise at the podium as they addressed elected officials. They learned the skills of persuasion and the temperament of advocates. They learned patience with democratic processes. Most importantly, they learned that they were difference makers. What a wonderful thing to discover at 9 years old. Certainly, learner agency and relevant and authentic learning experiences are evidenced in this delightful example. Create personalized learning plans and meet students where they are. Personalized playlists and content make it possible for each student to spend time and attention on what they need to grow academically. When we leverage technology, mentorship, flexible scheduling to customize learning based on individual strengths, skills, and interests, we can support learners to achieve their academic goals at a pace that makes sense for them, along a path that they co-design, and in a place where they feel efficacious. How might individualized learning plans be used to support students' academic, social, and emotional success? Invite learners to be part of an inclusive community, a community that is for everyone. Summer school has traditionally been a consequence for students who have not experienced academic success during a conventional school year. How might we rethink summer as extended time for learning to ensure that no student is stigmatized and all students are included in stimulating enrichment activities? When learners are recognized and valued for what they bring to the group, and when they feel like they truly belong, they become invested members of a community of learners. So, how might we create a community that helps students feel welcome, safe, and optimistic about their abilities as learners? A word of caution: avoid trying to do so much that your cup overflows. Remember, there's a fixed volume to every container. Before you add something to your plate, give yourself permission to take something off. In other words, grant yourself permission to take things away in order to provide space for the things that matter most to your school's COVID-19 recovery priorities. Remember, it's okay to say no. Saying no helps you to keep the important. Saying no helps you to do the more important more effectively. Think about subtraction as addition. Selective abandonment can be a useful leadership strategy at this time. In the previous section, we described considerations for summer learning. Whether it's now, midsummer, or sometime thereafter, what follows in the next section that Allison will lead is a process that you may use to engage stakeholders in agenda setting for the use of ESSER funds. At this stage of the prioritization process, we return to school priorities. Remember, you can't prioritize everything. Something may have to be stopped. If everything is important, we run the risk that nothing is. So review your current school priorities and ask, are these still the priorities that we value? What do we want to add? What do we need to stop? Allison will take you through this next exercise. Allison?
Thanks, Linda. This table, which is also a tool in our toolkit, goes through the initial conversation, a process for brainstorming practices in prioritizing funding use. In your initial planning conversations with stakeholders, it is critical that all ideas are put on the table. Using this table, as I mentioned, which resides in our toolkit, it will help you do just this. When you are soliciting feedback and holding meetings, it is critical to create high engagement. You may want to consider ways to do this and ensure that you are using multiple modes, whether you are using Zoom or in person. Also ensure that you have stakeholders RSVP to ensure that you are reducing the group size to a manageable size to ensure that all can appropriately give their feedback. Ensuring you record and brainstorm non-negotiables within each practice identified will be critical to the prioritization process which will follow. When looking at each strategy, asking these questions will help your group drill down to answer what the most targeted and effective funding use may be. For each strategy, you will want to answer the question, what is the proposed intervention to implement? Once you have brainstormed the strategy, you will want to go through these questions to ensure that you have a full understanding of what each strategy intervention will take. Why should this strategy be a priority? What data informed the identification of this strategy? How will this address identified unfinished learning or inequity exposed or exacerbated by the pandemic? What benefits or opportunities are there to this strategy? What barriers or disadvantages are there to this strategy? Who proportionally benefits or is burdened by this strategy? And does this strategy build capacity or does it need to be sustained? If so, how will we pay for it when our funding ends? It is important that all stakeholders feel that they have contributed their strategies prior to the prioritization process. After this initial brainstorming session, you can take the list and use it with your instructional leadership team to pare down all that has been generated to a list of high potential strategies. On the next slide, you will look at some questions that the instructional leadership team can then answer. Once you have generated the list with all of your potential strategies, it is important to meet with your instructional leadership team to pare down the list based on a variety of factors. Look at the cost and benefit. Is the cost reasonable for the amount of impact? Have we focused on a smaller number of high impact strategies so that we can yield positive outcomes? Or are we spreading our funding so thin that it will have little to no impact? What is the feasibility of the expected impact? Additionally, balancing the short term, which are pressing current needs, and long-term strategies that exist over the recovery period that will build capacity of existing staff so that they may continue the work after the recovery period has concluded. One of the ways to do this is to make sure that you are accurately and adequately evaluating tools that come to you from external sources. Next, Linda will go through a modified tool for screening external expertise when you are looking for supports and services that can support those strategies that you have identified as the largest priority.
Thank you so much, Allison. Once you've identified and formally adopted the priorities for your ESSER funding, you'll likely need to solicit support from independent vendors, as Allison described, who may source instructional products or professional development or the provision of other services. We recommend that school leaders use a transparent screening process to ensure pairings with the highest quality service providers who are committed to supporting your vision for school improvement. The LEAD project has developed an example of a screening process for professional development providers that includes an application, a scoring rubric aligned to the national standards for professional learning that can provide an objective process for the selection of professional development services with a tight alignment to your identified priorities. You'll find a number of resources on our COVID-19 page of the Leading Ed Partnerships website. And these materials, again, are being open sourced and can be modified to better meet your needs. This particular document suite includes a guidance document, an application for prospective providers, and a screening and rating template to review the potential partners. The vendor application makes it possible to investigate several important areas before entering into contractual agreements. First, does the product or service tightly align to your school's improvement priorities? Second, what's been their experience with client collaboration and responsiveness? In other words, to what extent can their materials or services be customized to better address your unique context? Do the consultants possess the subject matter expertise and experience to be credible with your educator audience? And what are your rights to use the materials after the contract period? Are the costs reasonable and necessary? Can the vendor supply references? Do they readily do so? And are the references from schools with demographics and challenges similar to your own? The professional provider protocol, and the image is to the right of your screen, is based on the 7 Learning Forward Standards for Professional Learning that include learning communities, leadership, resources, learning design, implementation, data, and outcomes. Using a 4-point rating scale, reviewers point to evidence that they may glean from the vendor application, from a phone or personal interview, from a formal presentation, or from publicly facing information available on the vendor website. Utilizing a transparent and impartial process will increase the quality of potential partners whose commitment to the success of your school is as deep as your own. There may well be a need to vet professional development providers, ed tech products, and/or curriculum and instructional materials. One helpful resource for evaluating the quality of instructional materials is the EdReports site. EdReports is an independent nonprofit organization committed to improving education by providing reviews of K-12 instructional materials. The EdReports Educator Reviewer Network currently consists of about 600 educators representing 47 states. Teams of 4 to 5 teachers spend hundreds of hours meeting weekly for several months to systematically review publisher-based content for ELA, mathematics, and science that is voluntarily submitted by content providers. To be eligible to participate in the Educator Reviewer Network, applicants must successfully complete 25 hours of training. Educators review ELA materials for research-informed systematic instruction in foundational early literacy skills, such as phonemic awareness, phonics, letter recognition, letter-sound relationships, and concepts of print. They also review sources for text quality and knowledge building, implementation support and assessment, and alignment to the standards and usability for teachers. They look for varied activities that enable students to develop research skills and critical thinking abilities. They look for materials that support vocabulary development, writing instruction for a variety of audiences and purposes, and independent reading of complex texts across grade levels. Educators review mathematics materials for scope and coherence and mathematical practices, and they review science materials for their treatment of the next generation science standards. EdReports even provides a 6-step process for formal curriculum adoption. This educator-led nonprofit can be a useful resource to review and compare instructional materials prior to purchase. Districts and schools may also visit the site to evaluate existing materials for possible gaps that may exist so that supplemental materials may be identified as appropriate.
As the saying goes, good communication is the bridge between confusion and clarity. A strong two-way system of communication that allows you to both provide information and receive feedback is crucial during times of change. Without that two-way communication, you will likely face misunderstandings, non-compliance, and resistance. However, clarity is not the only measure of a communication plan. In fact, great communication always begins with connection. We may sound like a broken record about this, But before someone will care about what you're saying, they need to first know that you care about what they are experiencing. They need to trust that you don't just have the school's best interest at heart, but that you care about the social, emotional, physical, and academic well-being of your students and staff. Once you've established a trusting collaboration through that shared common goal, two-way communication becomes much easier. As you may already be aware, the regulations governing ESSER III funding require recipients to seek public input and to take that input into account when developing or revising plans. Public input is required no less frequently than every 6 months. Additionally, it requires the district or school to engage in meaningful consultation with each of the following stakeholders: those representing the interest of children with disabilities, English learners, children experiencing homelessness, children in foster care, migratory students, children who are incarcerated, and other underserved students. This requirement is beneficial, not just in helping you shape your recovery response, but also in providing an opportunity for you to engage stakeholders in meaningful ways that promote transparency and understanding when it comes to how the school will make decisions about ESSER funding. For those of you participating in the LEAD project, you know that the first step in the cycles of inquiry approach is to fully understand the problem you want to address. How will you know what your most pressing challenges are? By exploring a wide variety of data and seeking input from those involved. And by that, we don't just mean student outcome data, although formative assessment is important. Additionally, you'll need to seek input from all of your stakeholders. In order to support your efforts to solicit input from multiple stakeholders, we've developed some new survey instruments you may be interested in exploring. One of the most valuable sources of data and information come from your teachers, students, and parents. By surveying each of these stakeholder groups, you can take the pulse of the community regarding how they experience schooling since the emergency closures went into effect last March. The goal is to gather evidence rather than relying on assumptions. For example, while you may be rightfully concerned about learning loss, you may find that a certain teacher or segment of your students actually excelled in the remote learning environment, as it provided them with an opportunity to try new and innovative approaches. Therefore, educators should look closely at data and participation during remote learning to identify bright spots as well as areas for improvement. It will also be important to analyze results with a lens on equity and attempt to uncover patterns or consider possible root causes of students' responses and behaviors. One of the other things we want to point out about the survey instrument is that we ask questions about how each has personally experienced the crisis. Everyone around the globe has experienced some level of disruption in their lives caused by COVID-19. The level of disruption may result in feelings of increased stress, anxiety, and depression. It's important for those that touch the lives of children to pay close attention to our own social emotional needs in order to ensure we are able to best meet their needs. Practicing self-care strategies, including eating healthy, getting enough sleep, exercising, and taking frequent breaks is critical during periods of prolonged crisis. Therefore, we want to draw your attention to several short surveys that might be used by you to gauge the well-being of your students and staff. Utah State University's School Mental Health Labs has developed short validated survey instruments that may be useful for screening or outcome monitoring purposes in schools. The beautiful thing about a survey is that it communicates to others that you value their feedback. It also takes time to administer. We usually recommend you keep the survey open for at least 2 weeks to ensure a high response rate, with a reminder sent midway. The other benefit to a survey is that it provides you with your most important commodity, time. You can use the period of time that the survey is being conducted to recharge your own battery, reflect, and regroup before engaging your ILT or others in a planning session. We wanted to provide a quick caution about surveys. If there's a strategy that you are prohibited from implementing, like for example, if your district or school board has determined it will not be allowed, then you likely do not want to ask any questions about it. For example, the graph on this slide comes from a national study that was published by the 74 Million. This chart might be difficult to read, but you'll see that the top rated item on this survey that parents said they wanted supports with was mental health supports for students and staff, followed by providing all students with computers and high-speed internet, then providing after-school tutoring. But I want to draw your attention to the fact that 72% of parents indicated they wanted the option to have their child repeat the grade they were in this year. That is a costly proposition. On average, nationally, that costs over $10,000 per student. And more importantly, it's been correlated with negative impact in future years. Providing computers and free Wi-Fi is equally as expensive and may not be necessary if your plans are to return to full in-person instruction in the fall. So if you find questions on our survey or any other survey for that matter that are not specifically aligned with what the district will consider, do not include questions when you survey your parents or teachers. You may be thinking that taking time to survey parents may set your planning timeline back, but spending the time now figuring out how to organize stakeholders, capitalize on various incentives the state may offer, and leveraging this incredible windfall most effectively will increase the positive impact it has on your students in school. In addition to the new survey instruments that we provided, we want to point out that there are other ways you may want to solicit input. For example, the state-administered 5 Essential School Climate and Culture Survey provides data that can be explored, particularly as trends over time. Additionally, you may want to conduct or have an external partner conduct focus groups with existing committees and groups involved in your school, such as your student council, the parent-teacher organization, your school's instructional leadership team or teacher teams, or external providers that offer programmings through your school. As you likely know, there are benefits and limitations to using various approaches for soliciting input into the prioritization of your ESSER funds. Here are just some of the things we encourage you to consider. The first is convenient sampling. Convenient sampling may result in a sample that is not representative of the entire school community. An example of this may occur if you only allow for online survey completion, or if you only provide an option to fill out the survey in person during a day when parent-teacher conferences are being conducted. In those cases, you may not have heard from the segment of your population that don't have Wi-Fi or can't attend a daytime activity at the school. Another common example of this is when you consult with existing school committees or parent groups because you know when and where they meet. That may be convenient, but those groups as currently constituted may not be a representative sample of the whole. You'll also want to make sure that you include demographic identifiers in any surveys to isolate responses from various subgroups you may want to target for supports. For example, if you ask about tutoring programs, you may find that the vast majority of parents want that service and they want it after school. But if you don't isolate responses from the parents of the specific subgroup of students that are most in need of those services, you may not realize that students most in need can't stay after school because they face transportation challenges. Proper lining is a psychological phenomenon in a group setting where respondents tell you what they think you want to hear or what they think is proper. What is the proper response to the question? When this occurs, it's not uncommon for behaviors not to match what the participants said they would do. This could be a challenge for discussions about equity. Efficiency is the enemy of equity. It takes time and effort to obtain input from all or most of the stakeholders that will be affected by your decisions. But take the time, because otherwise you'll build programs, but the kids you most want to help might be the ones who continue to miss out and fall behind. And lastly, expect to do something differently. You're required to not only seek input, but to use input in your decision making. But you shouldn't look at that sort of data gathering as merely for compliance purposes. The extent to which you have buy-in for the decisions you make will be determined by the extent to which you're able to justify that decision with data and information that outlines the need. If you attend to these common challenges with your data collection, you'll have useful information to develop responsive strategies. Everyone has been affected in unique and personal ways during the public health event, and we all want to experience a swift recovery from the crisis. After spending such a prolonged period of time living with so much uncertainty, it's understandable that people crave a return to normal. Normal is what we know, and normal provides some level of comfort, even if it's just the devil you know. But we all need to understand that normal will not get us to where we need to be. We cannot just go back to business as usual, because that will not address the problems caused by students losing a massive amount of instructional time. In fact, other emergency situations in modern history have demonstrated that unaddressed lost instructional time snowballs over time, resulting in even bigger problems. So the extent to which you receive support for the change process necessary to address the problem will depend upon your ability to communicate clearly around three things. One, why you chose the strategies you have. This includes describing the decision-making process, who was involved, and how was input from various stakeholders included. It also includes sharing what criteria were used in defining priorities, what data and research suggests about the strategies, what is the cost versus benefit of the strategy, and how does it align to the state's recommendation for use of funds. The second part is what you expect to be the outcomes of new efforts should also be communicated. Be specific with the research findings and how that translates to justifiable targets you expect to reach. Be clear about the measures you will use to determine progress and when you anticipate reaching certain milestones. This will help a lot of stakeholders understand the direction you're headed and with the school's recovery efforts, and can help you highlight early successes. And lastly, consider communicating why other popular strategies were not chosen. Explain if a strategy was determined to be cost prohibitive, or was anticipated to have too low of an impact, or creates a funding cliff, or exacerbates inequality. Whatever it is, make sure you communicate the reason. George Bernard Shaw once said, "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it had taken place." Communication isn't just the logistics of who, what, when, and how. Strong communication involves getting to the heart of a shared understanding of what can be, and building from that shared understanding to ensure individuals act in ways that support the shared vision. In order to get there, you may want to make sure you're routinely answering two key questions. What would it look like if we did this really well? And what can you do to ensure that we get there? Engaging stakeholders and imagining what could be is the fastest way to move them away from focusing on current conditions. After, after where you are right now is, after all, where you are right now is nothing more than just the starting point. Engage your stakeholders in discussions about their role in helping to bring the vision to fruition. That helps identify champions in various stakeholder groups and fosters an understanding that it'll take the collective talents and energies of the entire school community to achieve the shared vision. And honestly, with that many people working around a common goal, there's likely nothing that can't be done. But it doesn't happen by accident. It takes regular and ongoing communication and engagement to ensure everyone's on the same page.
As stated earlier, this is a multi-part series. The next module will be focused on unfinished teaching. We will offer principals a process for engaging teachers in a thorough review of the Illinois Priority Learning Standards to identify and address any gaps that may exist as students move through the grade bands. Please remember to visit the COVID-19 resources on the Leading Ed Partnerships or the Illinois State University Center for the Study of Education Policy website. We leave you with the following optimistic closing. Recall the African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Going far together sometimes also means going slow to go fast. Principals can't and shouldn't do this work alone. Going far together sometimes means going slow to make it possible to go fast a little further down the road. So rest when you need to, and don't forget to engage others in a Build Back Better process so that all students may return to school as safely and as quickly as possible. Thank you so much for your participation in Module 1 of the COVID-19 recovery.